This is the story of how one of the world's most beloved fairy tales was deliberately sanitized to hide a darker truth, and the version of Rapunzel you know from Disney films and children's books bears little resemblance to what the Brothers Grimm originally published in 1812. We're going to explore the real Rapunzel story, uncover what was changed and why, and examine the disturbing elements that were carefully edited out over time. And by the end, you'll understand why the fairy tale you grew up with is actually a heavily revised version of a much more troubling narrative. Most people know Rapunzel as the girl with impossibly long hair locked in a tower by an evil witch and eventually rescued by a handsome prince. But that's just the surface. What we know today went through extensive revisions before it reached us, and those changes tell us as much about Victorian-era anxieties as they do about storytelling. Jacob and Wilhelm Grimm first published Rapunzel in 1812 as part of their collection titled Kinder- und Hausmärchen, which translates to Children's and Household Tales, and this was the first volume of what would become one of the most influential folklore collections in history. What most people don't know is that the Grimms didn't just publish one version and walk away. They revised their entire collection through 7 editions, with the final version appearing in 1857. And Rapunzel underwent some of the most significant changes of any tale in their collection. Even the 1812 version wasn't the beginning. The Grimm brothers collected stories from oral traditions and earlier literary sources, and Rapunzel's lineage stretches back much further. A French writer named Charlotte Rose de Caumont de la Force published a tale called Percinet in 1698, which is considered the direct precursor to the Grimm version. And before that, an Italian author named Giambattista Basile included a story called Petrosinella in his collection called the Pentamerone between 1634 and 1636. That's the earliest known literary version of the tale, though there's also a version by Friedrich Schultz from 1790 that predates the Grimms. Rapunzel has deep roots in European storytelling, evolving and changing as it passed through different cultures and time periods. The name itself is more interesting than you might think, because Rapunzel isn't just a pretty name the Grimms invented. It's actually the German word for a real plant called rampion, with the Latin name Campanula rapunculus, and this plant has edible leaves and roots that were used in European salads and cooked as a vegetable, particularly the root. This detail matters because the entire plot hinges on this plant. The story begins darker than most people remember. A husband and wife live next door to a witch's garden, and the wife is pregnant and develops an intense craving for the Rapunzel plants growing in the witch's garden. In the original telling, this craving becomes so overwhelming that she begins to waste away, telling her husband she'll die if she doesn't get some of those plants. The desperate husband does what any devoted spouse might do in a fairy tale, and climbs over the wall to steal from a witch's garden. He gets caught, obviously. The witch confronts him and offers a deal instead of immediate punishment. Take all the Rapunzel you want, but you must give me your child when it's born. The husband, terrified and probably not thinking clearly, agrees to the bargain. When the baby girl arrives, the witch appears and takes her immediately, naming her Rapunzel after the plant that caused all the trouble. Think about that for a moment, because this child's entire fate is sealed before she's even born, all because of her mother's craving and her father's desperation. The parents essentially sell their daughter to save the mother's life, and it's a brutal bargain that sets everything else in motion. The witch raises Rapunzel, and when the girl turns 12 years old, the witch locks her away in a tower, but this isn't just any tower. The original description makes it clear there are no stairs and no door, only a single window at the top. Rapunzel is completely cut off from the world and accessible only by one method. This brings us to the most famous element of the story, which is Rapunzel's hair. the witch visits by calling up, "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." And Rapunzel drops her long hair down from the window so the witch can climb up using the hair as a rope. The original tale never specifies exactly how long Rapunzel's hair is, but think about the logistics, because if she's at the top of a tower, her hair would need to be at least 20 feet long, probably more. This is the girl's only connection to another living being, and it requires her to literally serve as the anchor point for someone climbing up her own body. Modern scholars have interpreted this imprisonment in various ways, and some see the tower as representing the transition from childhood to adulthood, with Rapunzel locked away right at the age of 12, which was historically considered the beginning of adolescence. Others view the witch as a symbol of overprotective or controlling parenting, isolating a child to keep them safe but ultimately causing more harm, and the tower becomes a prison dressed up as protection. Rapunzel lives in this tower, isolated and alone, until one day a prince happens to be riding through the forest and hears her singing. He's captivated by her voice and searches for the entrance to the tower, but can't find one. Then he witnesses the witch's visits and learns the secret. "Rapunzel, Rapunzel, let down your hair." The prince waits until the witch leaves and calls up the same words. Rapunzel lets down her hair and up he climbs. And in most versions, Rapunzel is initially frightened because she's never seen a man before, having been locked away since she was 12. The prince speaks kindly to her, and eventually they fall in love. And he begins visiting her regularly, climbing up her hair whenever the witch is away. And this is where we get to the most significant change between the 1812 version and the 1857 version, which is the edit that reveals everything about why the Grimms revised their tales. In the original 1812 version, Rapunzel becomes pregnant, and the way the witch discovers what's been happening is particularly telling. Rapunzel, who has been isolated her entire adolescence and knows nothing about the world, innocently asks the witch one day why her clothes are getting so tight around her belly, because she doesn't understand what's happening to her own body. This question immediately reveals to the witch that Rapunzel has been with a man, and the witch flies into a rage. By 1857, this detail had been completely removed. In the revised version, Rapunzel accidentally gives herself away by mentioning that the prince is much lighter to pull up than the witch, so it's a slip of the tongue, rather than a pregnancy, and the sexual implications are erased. Why did the Grimm brothers make this change? By the mid-19th century, they were increasingly marketing their collection as suitable for children, and the idea of an unmarried young woman becoming pregnant was too scandalous for the moral standards of Victorian-era Germany. They sanitized it and removed the most obvious reference to premarital sexual relations. But here's the thing. Even in the revised version, the implications remain if you're paying attention. The story still requires Rapunzel and the prince to have been meeting secretly and forming a relationship, so the pregnancy is edited out. But the transgression of female virtue, which was the real concern, is still there under the surface. What happens next is where the tale gets genuinely dark, even in the sanitized version. When the witch discovers Rapunzel's betrayal, she cuts off Rapunzel's hair and banishes her to a desolate wilderness. Remember that in the 1812 version, Rapunzel is pregnant when this happens, which means she's cast out alone to give birth in the wilderness, with no support, no shelter, no resources. Even in the later version, where the pregnancy is removed, Rapunzel is still exiled to complete isolation as punishment. The witch isn't done, though, because she keeps Rapunzel's severed hair and uses it to set a trap. When the prince comes calling that evening, climbing up what he thinks is Rapunzel's hair, he reaches the top to find not his beloved, but the witch waiting for him. The witch mocks him and tells him he'll never see Rapunzel again. In his despair and shock, the prince throws himself from the tower and falls into a thicket of thorns below, and these thorns pierce his eyes and blind him. The romantic hero of this fairy tale is physically mutilated as a direct consequence of his relationship with Rapunzel. And that's when the tale enters what might be its darkest phase. The prince, now blind, wanders in that Tune wilderness for years. And the text specifically says years plural. He stumbles through forests and desolate places, suffering and alone, unable to find his way or find Rapunzel. And meanwhile, Rapunzel is also wandering in exile, in many versions having given birth to twins, a boy and a girl, whom she's now raising alone in the wilderness. Think about the cumulative suffering here, because a young woman is imprisoned her entire adolescence for a crime her parents committed, then punished again for falling in love, the only human connection she's found. She's exiled and alone. Possibly with children she must somehow keep alive in the wilderness, and a young man is physically maimed and left to wander blind for years. All of this stems from that original bargain made over a handful of plants. Eventually, through what seems to be pure chance or fate, the blind prince's wandering brings him to the exact wilderness where Rapunzel has been living. He hears her voice, the same voice that first attracted him, and they're reunited as Rapunzel weeps while embracing him. Her tears fall onto his injured eyes. And this is where magic explicitly enters the story, because Rapunzel's tears heal the prince's blindness and his sight is restored. In some interpretations, this healing through tears represents the power of true love or the restoration that comes through reunion, while others see it as Rapunzel's compassion literally healing the damage caused by the witch's cruelty. Either way, the prince can see again. The couple then travels to the prince's kingdom together, bringing the twins along in versions where Rapunzel has children, and the prince reclaims his position so they can live, as fairy tales always promise, happily ever after. That ending, though, tacked on after years of suffering and trauma, feels almost perfunctory. The happily ever after is such a small portion of the story compared to the imprisonment, betrayal, exile, blinding, and years of wandering, and the tale spends far more time on suffering than on resolution. Scholars and psychologists have spent considerable time analysing what Rapunzel really means, and some interpretations come from Freudian psychoanalysis, looking at the tale through the lens of sexuality and development. The tower, the hair, the pregnancy can all be read as symbols related to coming of age and sexual awakening. Feminist scholars have taken different approaches and often focus on female agency and captivity. Rapunzel is passed from her parents to the witch to the prince, and she has virtually no control over her own fate. Her hair, which is literally a part of her body, becomes the means by which others access her, so she's both the prize and the property in the tale. Modern interpretations often ask what this story would look like if Rapunzel had actual agency, and what if she chose to leave the tower on her own terms. Others view the tale through the lens of Gothic literature because it contains classic Gothic elements like an isolated location, imprisonment, transgression against social norms, and the supernatural presence of the witch. The tale fits neatly into traditions of Gothic storytelling that were popular in the 18th and 19th centuries. There's also the interpretation that focuses on parental control, where the witch can be seen as the ultimate overprotective parent, so terrified of losing her child or having that child grow up and leave that she literally locks her away from the world. This backfires spectacularly, as such control often does, and the very act of imprisonment creates the conditions for rebellion and escape. If Rapunzel had been free, would she have been so vulnerable to the first person who showed her affection? The tower doesn't protect her, but makes her more vulnerable. The tale has been adapted over time in ways that tell us a lot about changing social values. The most well-known modern adaptation is Disney's Tangled, released in 2010 and earning over $592 million worldwide during its theatrical run, making it one of Disney's successful animated features. When you compare Tangled to the original Grimm tale, you'll see just how much has changed. In Tangled, Rapunzel is a princess stolen at birth for her magical hair, which grants eternal youth, and the witch becomes Mother Gothel, a vain woman who wants to stay young forever. There's no pregnancy, no blindness, and no years of suffering, while the prince becomes Flynn Rider, a charming thief with much more personality than his fairy tale counterpart. The story is an adventure comedy with romance, rather than a cautionary tale about desire and punishment. Disney removed virtually all the dark elements. The original bargain over stolen plants? Gone. The sexual implications? Gone. The mutilation and suffering? Gone. Instead, we get a spunky heroine who escapes her tower, has adventures and saves the day through her own agency, which is a fundamentally different story that happens to share a few key elements: a girl, a tower, long hair, and someone who wants to keep her imprisoned. This isn't necessarily criticism of Disney, because they were making a film for children in 2010, not trying to create a faithful adaptation of a 19th century German fairy tale. The differences are instructive though, and each era adapts these stories to reflect its own values and concerns. The Grimms revised their tales to match Victorian sensibilities, and Disney revised them again for 21st century audiences who expect their heroines to have agency and their love stories to be based on partnership rather than rescue. Numerous other adaptations exist as well, including stage productions, ballets, operas, and literary retellings, and each one makes choices about what to keep, what to change, and what to emphasize. Some lean into the gothic horror elements, while others reimagine Rapunzel as a more active protagonist, and still others explore the witch's motivations to make her more sympathetic. Some lesser-known details about the original tale often get lost in adaptations. The witch is never given a name in the Grimm version and is simply the witch, or the sorceress, defined entirely by what she is rather than who she is, which makes her more of an archetypal force than a character. The length of Rapunzel's hair, as I mentioned earlier, is never specified, so artists and filmmakers have had to make their own decisions about this. The only requirement is that it must be long enough to reach from the tower window to the ground, and strong enough to support the weight of an adult climbing up it. And when you think about the physical reality of that, it becomes almost more disturbing, because Rapunzel's body is literally being used as a ladder. The tale is classified in the Arne Thompson Uther Index as tale type ATU 310, known as The Maiden in the Tower. And this classification system organises folk tales by their narrative structure. There are variants of this story type, found across different cultures where the specific details change, but the core elements remain. A young woman imprisoned in an isolated location, discovered by a man, leading to consequences when the imprisonment is challenged. Why does this story persist though? Why do we keep telling it, adapting it, and reimagining it even as we change its darkest elements? Rapunzel touches on fundamental human fears and desires, like the fear of isolation and imprisonment alongside the desire for connection and love. The tale explores the consequences that come from trying to possess or control another person, and raises questions about what we're willing to sacrifice and what prices we're willing to pay. The tale also asks uncomfortable questions about protection versus imprisonment, because when does keeping someone safe become keeping someone captive? The witch arguably believes she's protecting Rapunzel by locking her in the tower, and from the witch's perspective, the outside world is dangerous, so she's keeping this girl safe. Safety without freedom isn't really safety at all though. It's just a prettier prison. There's something deeply resonant about a person trapped in a tower, waiting for rescue or escape, and it's a metaphor that applies to so many situations like abusive relationships, overbearing families, social expectations that confine us, even our own fears that keep us isolated. We all know what it's like to feel trapped in some way, and we all understand the longing for someone or something to help us escape. The hair itself is rich with symbolism because it's part of Rapunzel's body, something that grows from her, yet it becomes the tool by which others access her. It's simultaneously her only connection to the outside world and the means of her exploitation. And when the witch cuts it off, it's a violation, a kind of mutilation, even though hair can grow back. That severed hair used to trap the prince becomes a symbol of how trust can be weaponized. The story's darkness, which the Grimms tried to soften and which Disney has largely removed, is actually part of its power. Fairy tales weren't originally meant to be comfortable, because they were meant to convey truths about the world, to warn and instruct, to show consequences. The suffering in Rapunzel isn't gratuitous because it's the point. And the tale says actions have consequences, bargains must be honoured, imprisonment, even with good intentions, causes damage, and love requires sacrifice but also brings healing. By sanitizing these tales completely, we might lose something important. Not that we should traumatize children with graphic descriptions of the prince's blinding, but there's value in understanding that these stories have weight and depth because they deal with real human darkness, cruelty, isolation, desperation, and loss. They also offer hope through reunion, healing, and the possibility of happiness after suffering. The 1812 version with its explicit pregnancy was too much for Victorian sensibilities, and the 1857 version with its blindness and exile is too dark for many modern children's collections, while Disney's version removes almost all the darkness entirely. Each generation finds its own comfort level, but the original tale persists underneath all the revisions, waiting for anyone who wants to look deeper. Rapunzel remains one of the most recognized and frequently adapted fairy tales in the world, and the story is now in the public domain, which means anyone can adapt, retell, or reimagine it freely. People continue to do so and find new angles and new meanings in this old tale. Some modern retellings explore what happens after the happily ever after by asking whether Rapunzel struggles with trauma from her years of imprisonment, or whether the prince has to relearn how to see after years of blindness. What about those twins born in the wilderness, and how do they adjust to royal life? These questions acknowledge that healing from trauma isn't instant, even in fairy tales. Other retellings shift the perspective entirely and tell the story from the witch's point of view or from Rapunzel's parents' perspective. What drove the witch to make that bargain in the first place? And what kind of desperation leads parents to agree to give up their child? These questions add complexity to what could otherwise be a simple story of good versus evil. The tale continues to evolve because we continue to find ourselves in it. We see our own fears, our own desires and our own struggles reflected in this story of a girl in a tower. And that's the real magic of fairy tales. They're flexible enough to carry meaning across centuries and cultures, dark enough to feel true to human experience, but hopeful enough to remind us that even after years of suffering, healing and happiness might still be possible. This is the real Rapunzel, not a sanitized story of adventure and romance, but a dark tale of bargains and consequences, imprisonment and suffering, blindness and exile, followed finally by reunion and healing. It's a story that has been softened and revised again and again, with each era trying to make it more palatable, more appropriate, more comfortable. Underneath all those revisions, though, the original tale remains, and it's a reminder that fairy tales weren't always meant to be easy. They were meant to be true in the way that stories can be true, showing us the darkness in the world and in ourselves, but also showing us that we can survive it, heal from it, and maybe even find our way to something better on the other side. The Brothers Grimm gave us this tale over 200 years ago, and we're still grappling with what it means, which is the mark of a story that matters. Not because it's comfortable, but because it isn't. Not because it's simple, but because it's complex. And not because it gives us easy answers, but because it asks difficult questions that we're still trying to answer today. That's the dark truth behind Rapunzel. It's a story about the price we pay for desire, the damage caused by control, and the long, difficult path to healing and freedom. Maybe that's a truth worth preserving even as we continue to adapt and reimagine this tale for new generations.